I'm a professor at School of Law and Governance in Pristina in Kosovo. And I have students, they're studying online at the moment because of the COVID outbreak. And I have also several affiliations with a few universities in Europe, as well as in Latin America. So I have specialized in human rights law actually, and I had research in Coimbra University in Portugal and Buenos Aires University in Argentina and Latin American Caribbean University in Venezuela, but refugee laws especially and law over human rights. Actually, so perhaps most of you know that the world is suffering quite a lot in terms of the human rights violations. So when did human rights first appear? And Dr. Att actually has written on as a general agenda to examine to review the human rights. Actually, this is a very huge topic. So I would like to go through actually a shorter analysis over the human rights, like when did human rights first appear? So what do we understand actually by human rights? Morally good, justified, or acceptable, or restoring a normal or upright position, or restoring to a normal or a correct state. But do we have any correct state in the world? That's of course doubtful. So to me, actually, Hammurabi, he was a baby loan in Mesopotamia, now in Iraq, actually. I'm at the same time the founder of the Mesopotamian Academy of Arts and the Sciences. You can access our website too. So Hammurabi today in Iraq actually died in 17th century before Christ, and is the sixth and best known ruler of the first Amorite dynasty of Babylon. However, I have also written my second book as the second author about the Amorite civilization, the dynasty of Babylon, the first actually Mesopotamian civilization appeared to be known actually before Chris. And so what we understand as the Amorite ruler, Hammurabi, he was a crowned king of the Babylon and around before Christ 1792. He was a warrior actually, and a great administrator who honored the traditions of the Sumers and Akkadian and the other lands he brought under his authority. And he destroyed the many cities that defied him in ancient Mesopotamia. So how did Hammurabi code affect the society? He was the story's actually a great political self-promoter, and the image he created wasn't actually all him. He was a genuinely old ruler who wanted his subjects to enjoy a better lives. So major laws covered in the code, include actually at that time during Hammurabi was slander, trade, slavery, and the duties of workers, theft, liability, and divorce. So what do we understand when we say basic human rights? To many, as known actually in the Universal Human Rights Convention, the right to freedom from torture, right to equal treatment, right to privacy, right to asylum, and right to marry, right to freedom of third opinion and expression, right to work. When we talk about right to asylum, actually, many countries are not signatories. As far as I know, 52 countries signed for the right to asylum, most European countries, Canada, America, New Zealand, Australia. And so when we define human rights, actually, perhaps I should ask one of you, maybe you might respond, what do we understand by the definition of human rights? Or what do we understand by human rights abuses? Of course, the violation of the basic rights of the people by treating them wrongly, that's the abuse, actually. Of course, not only the people abuse each other, but of course, governments has been accused of human rights abuse as well. Please go ahead. So, what does right mean in a law? We have to consider about the right first before we enter into the topic of the human rights. Right is right for every living in the world, like a power of privilege held by the general public, as a result of the constitution or the regulation or judicial precedent or other type of the law. So what do we understand by the right, actually? Can we deny something that cannot be legally? I mean, such as the rise of free speech, for example, or press, or religious freedom, or raising a family, or privilege sometimes might be actually considered or might be taken away also sometimes, and it might be a special advantage or opportunity that is available only to certain people. And so if I ask to one of you, actually, can a right be taken away? It all depends on the constitution, but no countries, I believe, that they practice the constitutions as appropriate, as written in their legal document. So what rights does every human have? The right to life and liberty, for instance, let's say freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, right to work and education, and many more. And how about rights that they can be taken from the government, for example? The government is not legally permitted to take away your rights, of course, granted under the Constitution. And that means that actually human institutions are fraught with the same limitations and defects found in humanity generally. So who can take away rights? Who can take away all rights? Any idea, please? Okay. In every country or in different parts of the world, it all depends actually to the constitution, and the governments cannot really take those from you, because except when you commit a felony or you're convicted by a just process. So in these cases, according to internal law procedures, you might be arrested, but still the government cannot, the court or related organizations cannot violate your rights. So what is important in human rights? The freedom to vote, I guess the freedom of the vote, because we are living in a world of regulations, and so we have to vote for all freedom, and we have to decide for our self-determination. For example, the freedom of vote was ranked as most important human right in 5 of the 8 countries. The United States, for instance, values free speech as the most important human right. And or in Europe too, free speech is also highly valued in Germany. For example, I live in Turkey, and as you know, I will not comment about that, or whether Turkey or many other countries, you might not actually freely specify your opinions. For example, a Filipino journalist was recently given Nobel Prize for her struggle for democracy in the Philippines. I do appreciate her actually efforts. So we have a lot of ways actually to protect or support human rights for people around the world. So do we know how to protect and support all rights? This is a question. This might come out as a question too, actually. First, we have to listen to the other stories. Before we listen to the others, we can not understand what ways we have to protect and support the human rights. So we have to stand up against the discrimination. For example, there are 4 million refugees nowadays in Turkey from Syria, as well as lots of refugee flows from Central Asia. But I can see still discriminations by Turks actually occur time by time, although there's a hate crime law in, well, I don't think that it works actually, because you have to activate and you have to volunteer as an individual or donate to a global organization. I think International Peace Leaders Institute, in this sense, needs to be supported. To be actually, it's a volunteer organization supporting the human rights. So it's a good place to listen your stories as well, actually. And we have to stay actually connected with the social movements, and we have to stand up against discrimination. First, actually, after outlining all this hints about the human rights. So in the antiquity, actually, the first actually right of protection of the human rights comes from the East, from Iran and Pakistan and India. Pakistan was a former actually land of Iran. They were living together. So you might know about the Achaemenid. He was the Persian Empire of the ancient Iran. He established actually principle of the human rights in the 6th century before Christ under the Cyrus the Great, after his conquest of the Babylonian Empire in 539 before Christ. So the king issued the Cyrus cylinder discovered in 1870s and seen by some day as the first human rights document. See, so historians found out that we Easterner people actually created the best rights in the world. I mean, before the modern world. So the cylinder has been linked by some commentators actually to the decrees of Cyrus recorded in the books of Chronicles, for example, or Nehemiah and Ezra, which state the Cyrus law that is some of the Jewish people to return their homeland at that time from their Babylonian captivity. And sorry, I can't get the voice actually. Can you repeat again, please, or shall I continue? For example, Neil MacGregor is a well-known art historian, and the proclamation of the religious freedoms in Babylonian and elsewhere in the Persian Empire was a very important inspiration for the human rights by prominent thinkers millennia later, especially in the United States. And for instance, in opposition to the actually what I have outlined here, actually, the interpretation of the cylinder as a character of human rights has been dismissed by other historians too, and characterized by some others as a political propaganda of the Pahlavi regime. But it doesn't have any sense actually. You know why? Because what do we explore exists. Do we destroy? It's already in the documents. It's written already in stones. And I mean, archaeologists explore that. And I would like to point, many thinkers point the concept of the citizenship, for example. It has begun in ancient Greece. And today Greece is a very small country, but the first citizenship idea came from the Greeks. And so the 12 tables law established the principle, actually, privilegia ne irreganto. It's in Latin, actually, phrase that means privileges shall not be imposed. In ancient Greek documents, we can see this. Privileges shall not be imposed. And when we go to actually Buddha time, in India, for example, the Ashoka, perhaps some of you might know about the Mauryan emperor. He ruled from actually 260s to 230 before BCE, actually. Established the largest empire in South Asia, and Ashoka adopted Buddhism first and then abandoned an expansionist policy in favor of humanitarian reforms. And the edicts actually of Ashoka were erected throughout his empire, containing the law of piety. That means the law of religion. So the laws prohibited religious discrimination and cruelty against both humans and animals. Can you ever imagine? At that time, so the cruelty against not only humans, but also animals. So the edicts emphasized actually importance of tolerance in public policy by the government, and slaughter or capture, for example, of the prisoners of war was also condemned by Ashoka. Although some sources might claim actually, slavery was also non-existent in ancient India. Others states, however, that slavery existed in ancient India, where it's recorded in the Sanskrit law. However, I'm also doing another PhD in Buddhist studies at Lumbini Buddhist University. And so I'm also making actually research about the Emperor Ashoka at the moment. So in ancient Rome, actually, human rights legislation in the Roman Empire also included the introduction of the presumption of the innocence by Emperor Antonius. Perhaps you must have heard this emperor. And also Emperor of the Constantine the Great established complete freedom of religion. And in ancient and pre-modern eras, so what we understand that's some notions of rightness actually presented in ancient law, that religion are sometimes retrospectively included under the term of human rights. So, for example, there are a lot of philosophers have different ideas, like Samuel Moon is a sociologist, I guess. He suggested actually that the human rights is intervened with the modern sense of the citizenship, which did not emerge until the past few hundred years. So relevant examples actually existed in the ancient and pre-modern eras. So all the ancient peoples did not have the same modern conception of universal human rights. And in ancient West Asia also, perhaps you might know about the reforms of the Urakagina of Lagash. That's the earliest known legal code, and it's often thought to be the early example of reform. So, Urakagina himself actually is not considered actually perhaps as the ruling dynasty of the Lagash, and he was no reformer at all, perhaps in a way. But by attempting to curb the encroachment of a secular authority at the expense of the temple and prerogatives, it was if modern terms must be applied, I mean, reactionary. For example, a French author said about the discovery of the penalties for adultery for women, but not for men. So that represents the first written evidence of the degradation of the woman. And of course, there are different practices in every ancient era, like early Islamic Caliphate. And the historians actually agree for the Prophet Muhammad preached against that. He saw as the social evils of his day and Islamic social reforms in the rest, such as social security, family structures, slavery, and the rights of women and ethnic minorities were also actually intended to improve what was present in existing Arab societies. And for example, when we look at the Constitution of Medina, I don't know if you ever had the possibility to examine the Constitution of the Medina. And it's also perhaps known as a Charter of Medina, and it was drafted by Muhammad in 622. So it constitutes a formal agreement between Prophet Muhammad and all the significant tribes and families of the Yathrib, later known as the Medina, including the Muslim, Jewish, and pagans. He was trying actually, to establish peace between the different Jewish groups in conflict with each other at that time. So if the prisoners were in the custody of a person, for example, then the responsibility was on an individual. So important, actually, sociologist, as you know, Levis is also a Jewish, actually, author. He states that Islam broke two major chains to ancient slavery, which were to have far-reaching consequences. And one of this was the presumption of the freedom. The other, the ban of the enslavement of free persons except in the strictly defined. So there are different, of course, comments by the Western authors, sociologists, and philosophers like Schimmel or Montgomery, William Montgomery, for instance. Well, he believes Anne-Marie Schimmel states actually that compared to the pre-Islamic position of a woman, Islamic legislation means a kind of enormous progress. The woman has the right, at least according to the letter of the law, to administer the wealth she has brought into the family or has earned by her own work. And also another famous sociologist, Montgomery, he informs actually Prophet Muhammad in the historical context of his time might be a figure who testified on behalf of the women's rights and improved things considerably. So according to what he believes is that at the time of Islam began, the conditions of the woman were horrible or terrible. And they had no right to own property and were supposed to be the property of the man. Still. Actually, I met a Pakistani man in Istanbul recently, and Patani men, and who told me actually I have 4 wives and 3 of my wives are in Pakistan, and they are my property, so you should marry 2 to 4 women too. But no, woman is not property of the man. We all have free wills. That's Quran. That's what Quran says. They had no right to own property at that time. They were supposed to be the property of the man. That's what I believe. And if the man dies, everything goes to his son, not to his wife. It's still safe. And Prophet Muhammad, he, by institutionalizing the rights of property ownership and inheritance, education, and divorce, gave women certain basic safeguards. And Prophet Muhammad, he granted actually women rights and privileges in this field of the family life, marriage, education, economic, and neighbor rights that help improve women's status in history. And also, there are many authors who argue in a different way, actually, that women before Islam were more liberated, drawing most often on the first marriage of the Prophet Muhammad, and that of Prophet Muhammad's parents, but also in other points such as worship of male idols, Mecca, and so on, etc., etc. Another sociologist, Dale Eckelman, is also a Jewish author. Actually, he writes that actually Bella suggested the early Islamic community placed a particular value on the individuals as opposed to collective or group responsibility. But we do not know what our group responsibilities. We do not know about our collective rights. But all they were actually written at that time. So when we look at the Middle Age, actually Middle Age civil rights, for example, it has started, with the Magna Carta. It's English charter actually, originally issued in actually 12th century, that influenced the development of common law and many later constitutional documents such as the English Bill of Rights or the United States Constitution or the United States Bill of Rights, and etc. And so after the World War II, actually, rise in a war and extension of the General Convention came into being between 18th and the 19th century as a result of the efforts by Henry Dunham, the founder of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And they were also actually different protocols, but that didn't really work a lot. So more than 200 countries of the world actually were the signatory of this convention. And thereafter, Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out. And so nowadays, actually, we are all subject to the European Convention of the Human Rights. That is the right to life and right to privacy, or actually freedom from the discrimination, and etc. So I would like to sum up actually what we have outlined today in our lecture, that Achaemenid actually Persian Empire of the ancient Iran established unprecedented principles of human rights in the 6th century before Chris on the Cyrus the Great. So after he conquests of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in 539 before Christ, the king issued the Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 1870s and seen by some today as the first human rights document. So second, we talk about Ashoka actually. Ashoka was erected throughout his empire, containing the law of piety, that is the law of religion. So this laws prohibited religious discrimination and cruelty against both humans and animals. So edicts emphasized actually the importance of the tolerance in a public policy by the government. Slaughter or capture of prisoners of war, was also condemned at that time by Ashoka. And although some sources actually still pretend that slavery was also essentially before the Christ. So I mentioned about the oldest legal code. Actually, today is the Neo-Sumerian code of Ur-Nammu for Christ 2050. Several other sets of laws issued at that time in Mesopotamia, including the code of Hammurabi. So, well, actually, finally, we were talking about the rights in Islam. Actually, it's firmly rooted in the belief of that God and God alone is the lawgiver and the source of the human rights. Due to their divine origin, no ruler, government, assembly, or authority can curtail or violate in any way of human rights conferred by God, nor can they be surrendered. So I do admire actually the Holy Prophet actually took the loss of the people about human rights, equality of human rights. All mankind from Adam and Eve, from Adam to Hawa, and Arabs has no superiority over a non-Arab, or a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, white has no superiority over black, nor a black has any superiority over white, except by religion and good action, obedience of the rights. For example, according to Mevlana or Safiur Rahman, it was delivered in after that in 636 actually, the last Hajj of the Holy Prophet. The last sermon of the Prophet teach us actually the importance of equality and fair treatment, and laid the outline for her first human rights declaration. And many hundreds of years before Magna Carta or Bill of Rights or UN Human Rights Codes, the important human rights of the last sermon were given below. For example, Muhammad Tahir al-Qadri mentions about the equality of human rights, that all mankind is from Adam and Eve, and the Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, or a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, white has not superiority over a black, nor a black has any superiority over white, except by piety and good action. So we all are created equal. That has been stated actually during Mohammedan era. Obedience of rights, rights of life, or right of property, or right of actually society members, and economic rights, rights of the inheritance, and newborns' rights, and rights of a social identity, rights to receive that, rights of the ownership, women rights or children rights,